Welcome back everyone here and also everyone who is joining us online to this session 3 of the People's Commission into the Housing Crisis. And this particular session, we're going to examine the role of housing in a fair economy in relation to key workers in particular, but also more widely the experience of working people as they navigate the housing system, particularly people earning the minimum wage and working casually, as well as, of course, our essential workers who are increasingly being priced out of their communities. We've got the potential to hear from unions who are supporting members struggling with housing issues, as well as employers who can't attract workers or retain them due to the high cost of housing. Each of our speakers will have around 5 minutes to share opening remarks, followed by some short and sharp, probably questions from Doug and myself as commissioners, which will be based on what you've shared in your written submissions and with us here today. And at the conclusion, I'll do my best to summarise some of what we've heard and draw things to a close. But before we dive in, I do want to particularly acknowledge and thank our speakers for being here with us today. And I want to take the opportunity to remind you that, and in fact remind people in the room that some of the topics that we're going to cover may be heavy, difficult to talk about and listen to, and you're welcome to take a break at any time. If you want to stop, step out of the room. Anyone online? I think we do have an online participant. No, not for this one. But if you want to stop at any point in time, walk out of the room, that's completely fine. We do have support workers here in the room, and of course, anyone who's joining us today are welcome to access that support. So with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Lou.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lou Halsco, and this is my story. It's a very difficult one to tell. I'm a highly skilled and very experienced registered nurse, and I have been experiencing both homelessness and housing stress. I am also in my late 60s. Stable, secure and affordable housing is something we all have a right to. Being homeless is not a choice, but a failure of our society to treat all people with dignity and respect. I have survived childhood abuse and marital abuse. I have been forced to move often and to change jobs frequently in an attempt to keep me safe. This has come at a huge cost, financially, socially, and in my career. It has cost my security and my ability to trust. I struggle every day to just keep going, to be able to function, to work. The toll is enormous. Renting in this country is incredibly demeaning. There is no security of tenure. You're lucky to get a 12-month lease. Never anything longer, and never anything that's secure. Agents can access your place multiple times and don't seem to think it might be intrusive to you. You can't hang a picture, paint a wall, put up a blind. The place is never truly your home. And the lease can be terminated at short notice at any time. As for the rent itself, the recommendations by people who seem to know these things is that we don't pay more than 30% of our take-home pay in rent. The reality at the moment is closer to 70%. It doesn't allow for any saving, any entertainment of any sort, holidays, or a life worth living. What goes? Phone access, car, I need my car to get to my job, medical care, dental care. It's a totally overwhelming and really frightening situation. To be classified as an essential worker, one would assume this to be a valued role, but no. Yes, we were applauded admirably during the pandemic. And every year on May 12th, that's International Nurses Day for those who don't know, we get rewarded with a coffee voucher or a sausage, for which we're supposed to be grateful. The government does not think we are of value in any shape or form and is always extremely reluctant to pay us highly skilled professional working people what we are worth. We are seriously underpaid for the level of skill and knowledge we have. With the cost of living crisis, the unbelievable rise in rents, and our significantly below inflation level of pay, is it any wonder nurses are leaving the system and the state in droves? I've spent too many of my years isolated from my family and friends, living in rural and regional towns, working in jobs that did not allow me to fully utilise my skills. 6 months ago, I decided I'd had enough, and it was time to try and return to Sydney in an attempt to forge an acceptable future. I have been able to secure a job I really love, but housing has been extremely difficult. I have spent 6 months couch surfing. I don't really know how I'm going to afford to stay in Sydney. I have just signed a lease just a couple of weeks ago, but the reality is that it is close to 65% of my take-home pay. It's not sustainable in any format. I hope like hell I don't have an accident or become ill, as this will instantly result in being homeless again. And what about my future? I'm 68 this year. Will I ever be able to retire? And where on earth would I be able to afford to live? The future absolutely terrifies me and fills me with utter despair. I have no hope at all, and I am broken. My mental health has taken a massive hit. So, what can be done to fix this for me and all the other essential workers as we really struggle to survive and maintain our jobs? Affordable housing must become a priority for everyone. With secure, safe, affordable housing will also come more productivity, better health, and better communities. According to Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, food and shelter are our most basic needs as humans, followed closely by safety and the feeling of belonging, none of which I have. Our government can do better, and they must do better. With the pathways to applying for both social and affordable housing, these forms are incredibly complex. And I am an intelligent, articulate, and educated person. The process of filling these forms was traumatizing, humiliating, and dehumanizing. I have yet to finish and complete this form, although I have attempted it 6 times. The section asking to prove your homelessness has just defeated me. I can't do it. I can't face it. I don't know how you do that. How do you prove you have nowhere to live? That section has reduced me to a quivering mess, and I've been unable to return to it on many attempts. I feel judged by the way I live. I feel without worth, and I feel not human. And this is my story.
So much for sharing that story with us, Lou. We'll now turn to Rita.
Thank you. And thank you, Lou, for sharing that. My name is Rita. I'm the Government and Community Relations Organiser with the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association. We represent around 78,000 nurses, midwives and assistants in nursing across New South Wales, and we're also the New South Wales branch of the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation. I think I'll start with just some issues from our position statement. Affordable housing has been a huge issue for our members, and it's growing harder and harder, particularly where we've had a wages cap in New South Wales for a number of years. And it's certainly having an impact on recruitment and retention into the professions of nursing and midwifery. And it's starting to bite around recruitment, which I'll talk about in a moment. We've surveyed our members on a number of years. Every 2 years, we've done a housing survey, and we've had over 3,000 responses to each of them. Housing affordability is a growing concern as Australian house prices have become increasingly unaffordable over the last 10 years, and rents in many areas are increasing at twice the rate of inflation. Australia's current private rental market is not meeting the needs of all low to middle income households. These households experience significant trouble securing affordable and appropriate housing. In a 2021 survey of members, 77% of respondents indicated that a lack of affordable, secure housing was a big issue for them. The problem has the potential to impact on quality of life for families and undermines community cohesiveness. Many nurses and midwives find it increasingly difficult to access suitably priced housing of an acceptable standard within reasonable proximity to their own workplace. Housing affordability is a major concern for nurses and midwives in many areas, including metropolitan, rural and regional areas, where the income of the household is not sufficient to pay market rent close to where they work. There can be significant implications for the quality of essential services and the functionality, including the health and safety of cities when nurses and midwives are unable to live in high-cost metropolitan regions. People may require access to affordable housing, including affordable rental housing, at different times, depending on factors such as underemployment, caring responsibilities, family breakdown, and localised economic influences. It is the position of the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association that public policy and planning must address the needs for affordable housing for all workers in key service areas. Nurses and midwives should be able to rent or purchase housing that is suitable for their needs, that is secure and priced so that they can meet other living expenses. Access to affordable housing within reasonable proximity to centres of healthcare delivery should be considered an important factor in recruitment and retention of nursing and midwifery workforce. And just as an overview from that, we know that having spoken to directors of nursing, it's having an impact on recruitment and retention. As I said, our coverage goes from assistants in nursing who may be in insecure work or from non-English speaking backgrounds who work part-time in the aged care sector, up to area directors of nursing that would be on quite significant salaries and everything in between. Directors of nursing in public hospitals are becoming very concerned about this. If you think of examples like St Vincent's Hospital or Royal Prince Alfred Hospital just next door, they are finding that they can get new graduate nurses and midwives to come in and take their new grad year, and they will, if they're lucky enough, find a house share, and there might be 4 or 5 or 6 people in a house share. But these are new practitioners, they're new grads, they're just coming out. By the time they become expert practitioners when they're 4th or 5th year and they're starting to learn skills in a particular specialty and become expert practitioners, that's also the time that they're perhaps, and it's a female-dominated industry, obviously, that's also the time when they're starting to consider having families or partners. and they want their own place. They can't find anywhere close to where they live and they're moving further and further out. And that has an impact for the workforce because many of the positions you have to be within 20 minutes to come back. So if you're a perioperative, I know Lou's worked in perioperative work, to be on call, midwives, where you have to be back in the workplace within a 20-minute turnaround. And we've had cases where members have lost their job because they can't get anywhere to live. There's also a 24/7 workforce, so you do shift work and going home, if you finish at 10 o'clock at night, if you've got a 1.5 hour commute or 2 hour commute, you're back at 7 o'clock in the morning, it's not safe. If you compound that as well with having to look for childcare, and the childcare has to be close to where you work. Otherwise it's, you know, if you have to detour at 7 o'clock in the morning you're coming from the P and you have to drop your kids in one place and then get over to PA and then do the same in a return, it's not feasible. So it has a significant impact on the workforce. And I'd like to finish there because I think the other people's statements are very powerful. And I'd like to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. We particularly liked what Doug had to say this morning around government supplying, not outsourcing the supply and development of housing and the maintenance. Without secure employment, it's having a terrible, terrible impact on the mental health of our members. People are talking about living in cars. These are people who are in full-time employment. They're living in cars, they're living in cars with their children. Rural areas are just as bad because of the rise in Airbnb. Any of the hospitals such as Port Macquarie, Byron, Coffs, Bega, they have real problems recruiting into those positions. And our one hospital has 14 vacancies for midwives. They can't recruit, the midwives are recruited into it, but they can't take up the position because they can't find anywhere to live, because there's very limited accommodation with people moving out into the regions and remote working, on top of the rise in Airbnb and short-term rentals. There's nothing in those areas at all. So it's not just a metropolitan problem. It's multifactorial, but we think it's a huge issue for all workers, and we commend the work of the Commission and hope that it has some positive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. And
my name's Saffron. I live in Katoomba on Darug and Gundungurra country. I've worked in the community services sector since 2002, predominantly in homelessness services and social housing, and I now work as a tenant advocate at Blue Mountains Tenants Advice and Advocacy Service. I currently live in a share house with my partner, son, my mother, and our dog. I'm a lifelong renter who's moved 33 times. Sometimes these moves were by choice, but mostly they weren't. And to clarify a little bit more on that, by the time I was ready to leave home from moving out from living with my mum, we had moved 18 times. My mum was a single mum living on the pension, and yeah, I ended up going to 5 different primary schools through my childhood. Luckily, I got to go to the one high school, but had to keep travelling further and further. Jobs in the community sector are usually part-time and often by contract or subject to funding. I've worked in a few different services over my career, so depending on my job and with my partner's income also fluctuating, some years have been tough financially, with rent being the largest household expense we've faced. We considered buying a place at one stage, but soon realised we just didn't have enough income to save a deposit from scratch while paying rent. We've often felt the stigma associated with being renters, with well-meaning people telling us we could just solve our rental issues by simply buying something. Since we first looked into buying, house prices have soared, and we know it's really not an option for us. We don't have a bank of mum and dad. We just don't. We made the decision to share a house with my mum after we received a 90 days notice just under 2 years ago. My mum's health was deteriorating and needed to be closer by. She was living in a cabin 2.5 hours away from us, a decision she'd originally made because she could no longer afford to live in the Blue Mountains as a single person. In a fiercely competitive market, navigating through a tense period of property hunting and applications, we finally secured approval for a house. And while the rent was steep, pooling resources with 2 other adults made it a manageable expense for us all. We signed a 12-month lease, scraped together a huge bond and money to move the 2 homes into one. 6 months into our 12-month lease, we got a notice that the landlord was selling the property. This was an unexpected shock, and we'd only just started to feel settled in our new home and neighbourhood, and had only just begun to recover financially from the last move. Fortunately, this time round, we found another property available at the same rent fairly quickly. It seems it had remained unoccupied for a few months due to its higher rental price and unconventional layout, but thankfully for our household, the layout was all right. Once more, however, we had to gather funds for another huge bond and the expenses of hiring a removalist, packing and bracing ourselves for another upheaval. We've now been at that house for just over a year. We've signed a new fixed term lease for a year, and we've already had 1 moderate rent rise. We're hoping that we can settle for a few years there, and we're hoping that the rent rises don't get excessive. Our son is now 19. He wants to move to Sydney, and I don't know how he'll do that. He's delayed moving out of home while he works out a plan and saves money. It seems like a great solution living as a family group, and while it's working for now, it's hard to predict how it's going to work in the long term. In my work, I've seen the housing crisis up close and have witnessed it affecting multiple sections of the community. Our service assists any tenant, but the themes are the same. No grounds terminations are frequently given, and people are having a hard time finding another place to move to. I've currently got 3 tenants I'm working with who've received no grounds notices. They weren't able to find a place by the time the notice expired, and we managed to get them extensions of time. And now I'm finding I'm having to talk them through the process of sheriff lockout because they just can't find anything. And these are people with good references. Trends I'm currently seeing amongst my clients are more people are leaving rentals into homelessness because there's nothing available. Many wage earners are paying rent that's unaffordable and are cutting corners to make ends meet, at times relying on services for assistance with food or paying bills. Most private renters on Centrelink payments are spending most of their income on rent, and life is focused on surviving one fortnight to the next. Many are completely reliant on services such as Second Bite for food. Families are having to relocate to regional areas just to get something they can afford. But they're away from their schools, jobs, friends, family, community, doctors. Tenants aren't able to assert their rights to have repairs done or refuse an unaffordable rent increase because of how easily a landlord can evict them. More people are living in their cars or making plans to buy a van to live in as a solution. Now, there are a few people who actually work in my sector who are considering this as an option because of their housing insecurity. Many people are stuck in a cycle of homelessness. The interventions in place to assist are not adequate for the current market. Since we moved to the Blue Mountains 25 years ago, our rent has steadily climbed. Our rent is currently 5.5 times higher than when we first moved to the area, yet wages have not climbed at the same rate. I am worried about what the future holds. Housing security is so tenuous and anything can change just like that. Housing needs to be affordable, it needs to be stable, and there needs to be a sense of choice, such as where you live, and you need to be able to remain in your community. It's vital. A home should foster safety, not be the source of fear and insecurity. And to me, that is the role of housing in a fair economy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Saffron. And now I'm going to invite Doug to ask you, some questions to help elaborate some of the issues you raised and the solutions.
Well, thanks very much. And I really appreciate We really appreciate you taking the time to outline the issues that are affecting you guys. Lou, safe and stable housing, that's a consistent message that we've had today. And given that you have a good job, you have a stable job, and yet you can't afford housing, do you have any ideas that we should look at in terms of fixing the problem from your perspective?
The only thing the only thing I've really come across is I've read a book a while ago and I've reread it recently called Utopia for Realists. I don't know if you know it. It's by some Scandinavian author whose name I cannot remember, but it's about the aim of paying everybody a universal wage. And with that comes security of housing, security of food, and people feel they don't, all the stresses associated with those things not being in existence go. It reduces the overall government's cost in medical requirements because people keep better health. It increases productivity in countries as well. So there are places in the world that do this and they have huge benefits from this. Now, our system here in Australia is not designed to have that implemented. We have a very different system. We have a system of those who have and those who haven't, unfortunately. And those who have think that those of us that haven't are something they can walk on and treat like dirt. And we need to do better. I don't really have an active solution for this other than to say the government needs to just bite the bullet and provide housing out there, not through private investors. They need to do it from the government. The government, like post-war, when they developed all that housing post-war, well, maybe it's time to do that again. Maybe this is a different type of war. But we need to, without a massive input from the government to build secure housing for people who can't afford on the current market, people like me, I'm a working nurse, people like Saffron, who's working in her industry, Rita, all of us out there, we need to be able to work. We need to be able to work within Kui of where we're living. So the government really just needs to bite the bullet and do it. How they're going to do it, I have no idea. I can't tell you, and I know it's become too politicized and it should not be a political issue. It should be a humanitarian issue. We should be looking at it not as a two-party system or we're going to do this and, not that. They need to get together and treat this humanely and to treat it with respect.
Yeah. Now you indicated that even though you've got these skills, you're an essential worker, that you've actually spent time couch surfing.
Yes.
And that this was affecting your mental health.
Absolutely. I came out of a very abusive marriage, which left me homeless. And I was stalked for many years by him. So I have had to move. And I can bet you I've had 62 moves in my life.
My goodness.
And just about to do my 63rd. And I'm at a loss for how to overcome this. And as I said before, I'm not stupid. I'm an intelligent, educated person, and I never anticipated I would be here in this situation, ever. But I don't seem to ever be able to get ahead. Working as a nurse and moving around the way I've had to, moving because you get evicted for no reason, the rents go up suddenly by $150 a week or something, which you can't afford, or my husband has found me. So I've moved to keep me safe. yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know how you fix that.
Look, thanks for that. I might just move on and may come
Yeah.
back. But Rita, you know, the nurses are a very good, strong, effective union. And yet your members are facing the same issues as unemployed people, as, you know, people that are on welfare. So this is not an issue that is isolated to one group in the community. I worked for some years in Musselbrook. I moved from Sydney with the then Electricity Commission. I was a maintenance fitter. I was deemed an essential worker to keep power going. And when I moved, I was supplied rental accommodation from the Electricity Commission. Has the union raised these issues, I assume, with the state government as to whether they have got any idea how to deal with it?
Yeah, we're part of a number of organisations, including the Everybody's Home, which we're very happy to support and work with. We lobby at any opportunity that we can for our members. We try and lobby for all workers because nurses and midwives have a high profile and, you know, they're seen as lovely people, which we are, of course, often. But if nurses and midwives can't afford the money, then what chance do the cleaners and the receptionists and all the other people that work in the hospital? So we don't want to pitch one group of worker against another. All workers have a right to decent conditions. However, the gap has become so wide in Australia, where investments of housing have become investments rather than a human right, that you have a right to access. I grew up in council housing in England. My mother was a midwife, and the housing came with the job. That they moved to a new town, they had lots of births, and the council supplied a very nice 3-bedroom house that they spent all their lives in, that was subsidised housing there. We lobby both with super funds and housing organisations, and anywhere we're invited to, we take an active participation to say that we need to have a range of products that fit the needs of our members. And many of the products that are out there are not fit for purpose for our members. They are often referred to as the missing middle. So they don't have enough. Our members have all the same. Lou is a member of ours. One of the things that they have, they flee in domestic violence, they have their own issues. They're also providing healthcare to people with these problems and the issues that they face. How do you provide healthcare to people who don't have secure homes to live in, that are moving all the time? You're trying to patch up all the physical and mental damage that is done to the people who don't have a roof over their head. And we are concerned about the idea of just build more if they're all going to be $2 million luxury apartments. You know, that we know that trickle-down economics does not work, that eventually everybody will do better from it. If you don't have housing, and we applauded the comments by Doug this morning about government building and running and maintaining social and community housing, taking that back, because they're the only ones who can do it on the scale that we need and in the, you know, joined up way, and maintaining those things and taking away the stigma that attaches to it. They've run it down over the years into such a place. I was really shocked when I not when I came here, because the social and community housing was good, but there was a stigma attached to social housing that we didn't have in Europe at all. It was strange. Why would that have a stigma?
Yeah. So Rita, just before I move to Saffron, what superannuation fund do the nurses predominantly belong to?
HESTA and Aware Super.
Have you had discussions with HESTA?
Our leadership team has, for sure.
Any progress? on housing?
I know they're looking at ethical investments, and there are more and more pushes towards super funds. We don't support people taking their own money out of their super
Sure.
fund, because that was set up
Yeah.
to fund your retirement. But for super funds themselves, who, as you mentioned this morning, have billions and billions of dollars to work with governments to build returns. I know that there is the rules around the fiduciary duty to maximise returns. But if it's members' money, if you retire and you don't have a secure home, you can't lose a perfect example of that. Everything in Australia is predicated around the fact that by the time you retire, you have safe, secure and affordable housing, be that secure rental or you own a place. Now, ownership is getting less and less likely, and there's less and less. The private market doesn't really work for people, as we keep hearing over and over again. And the social cost of that, the children, how do they grow up? You end up with intergenerational trauma from these people. All our members were reporting the terrible suicidal ideation, the problems we heard this morning from those brave women who spoke about the struggles they were facing in the first session, and their children, that knock-on effect. How do you do it? So, you know, what one of the women spoke about, trying to keep her child alive. You know, that's a terrible indictment on our society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe I can move to Saffron, and you've talked about intergenerational issues as well. But Saffron, you mentioned it in your submission that there's intergenerational housing stress in your family. Mm-hmm. It just seems to me that this is now seen to be normal life in Australia. But if you've got intergenerational wealth, that doesn't matter. Mm. And I know Katoomba. I lived in the Blue Mountains for a number of years, and Katoomba is seen as a place where you could get some, you know, reasonable rents. That's not the case anymore, is it?
No, it's not. So our area is very much a tourist destination now. There's a lot of Airbnbs. When we were actually looking for a place, when we got the 90 days, it was not long after the whole COVID lockdown. And there were a lot of properties where people were just kind of taking a break from renting out their Airbnb to holiday people, because they weren't getting the tourists to the area. So there are a lot of, you could instantly pick it. They were only offering 6-month leases. You'd walk in and the house was all decorated with "Love My Home" and, you know, bed linen and all the furniture and everything. And yeah, they were planning to return back to the Airbnb market as, you know, once tourists were coming back, which they have now. And yeah, working in the service I work for now, we're seeing that there's less and less vacancy rates for people. There's also a lot of wealth in sort of the Katoomba area and throughout the Blue Mountains, where there are people who just own holiday homes that sit there empty doing nothing. So yeah, there's a lot of dwellings that kind of sit there that could be utilised.
Yeah. So both you and Lou have had to move too many times. And to be honest, I had not considered the cumulative cost that this has on a family. I mean, that money of moving, if that was in your super for your retirement or paying a home off, would be you know, quite significant. How should there be such a cost to move? Is there?
Yeah, I mean, it would, I think in some respects it would be great if, like, if you're in the private rental market, if the legislation could be changed. So maybe landlords could bear some of that cost if they're giving you a no grounds notice, or if they're needing the property back to help with the cost of moving. I mean, it's the removalist trucks. And I know with clients that I also assist, getting assistance for moving is a huge thing, and services often have to put a cap because it's just one of those costs that blows out. And yeah, if you're having to do it more than once or, you know, a couple of times in a 1 year period, it's incredibly stressful and it takes a long time to recover. And then the other issue is with bond at the moment. And I know they're looking at the portable bond scheme. I don't know where that's at now, but, you know, every time you move, your rent's gone up. Like the next place you move to, the rent's going to be a lot higher. So therefore your bond that you're having to come up with is a lot higher, but you can't access your bond from your previous place until you've moved out, handed the keys back, cleaned it up. And then from working as a tenant advocate, I'm noticing that a lot of landlords kind of feel like they have an entitlement over the bond and they'll claim that bond, and then it's left to the tenant to defend themselves and fight to get their bond back. And then sometimes the landlord gets compensation payments on top of the bond. And it's really hard because tribunals an evidence-based process. It can be really hard for tenants to prove that what they're being charged for is unfair. So they're kind of on the back foot. And they've had to move. So a huge amount of cost.
The other part of the cost factor is, in my situation, I've had to move towns in regional Australia, and moving from Broken Hill to Dubbo or to Wagga or something costs an absolute fortune.
Mm.
And I'm on my own.
Yeah.
You know, I can't pack up and move this in the back of my car, and I've only got a little car. You know, I need to pay these costs every time. It's well, it's just unaffordable, quite frankly. Yeah.
So, you know, it's unbelievable. Here we have, you know, essential workers. We've got Saffron, who assists people in the housing sector, and yet both of you are faced with the problem of unaffordable housing, unstable housing. So if this happens to you guys, you know, it is such a widespread, systematic problem in Australia. And unless, you know, governments actually intervene more than they're doing, it's not going to be resolved. Rita, you spoke about the public housing in the UK. I was also brought up in public housing in the UK, even though I've got an Aussie accent now. You know, it's considered much differently, isn't it, than here?
Yeah, and really, really good, solid quality. You know, all those houses they built after the war. As I say, my parents moved to Harlow. It was a new town that was built to rehouse people out that were bombed from the East End. And the quality of the housing was excellent. There was, throughout the whole town, there were built-in clusters of almost like communities. You know, each area had a GP surgery, a little health centre, a chemist, a newsagents, a post office that people could walk to. You know, in that area, they were very good, very solid houses. They were beautifully maintained. There was no stigma attached to them at all. They had gardens, you know, a little garden. They had lots of green areas. Yeah, they didn't have the stigma that it has in this country at all. So there's different models. Not everybody's going to buy, and particularly, I can't see the housing market, the prices coming down anytime soon. So for nurses and teachers and community workers, how are they ever going to afford, you know, $2 million houses plus? You know, our children aren't going to be doing it. Nobody's winning in this system. Although you see how many, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I know that there was an awful lot of auctions in Sydney in the last 6 months that people didn't have mortgages. They paid cash for a property at an auction. I mean, you know, that's not normal people though that can buy things like that. And as I say, the the mental stress on people who are having to move. Our members are saying this all the time, that the intergenerational living, either they're having their parents to come in to live with them, or they are adults that are moving back in with an elderly parent because they have nothing, 2 or 3 generations in the one house. People not being able to take shifts to get to being called in to do a shift at work and having no money to put fuel in the car.
Doug, I'm mindful of time. I might
Yep.
just ask a couple more follow-up questions, just if I can.
Sure.
And feel free, anyone, to jump in, including you, Doug. But
Wouldn't do that.
I really wanted to take the opportunity to draw as well on Saffron's particular expertise, given that you've been working in the housing assistance sector for many years. Can you give us a sense of how this has changed over time? Because what both Lou and Rita have described, surely this is a situation that is now at a crisis point. You know, were you seeing this a decade ago?
I was seeing this as a crisis. I think services were calling it a crisis at least 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I started working in a homelessness service, I think in 2013, and we were already flagging there was a crisis. At that point, it was mostly affecting people in poverty on Centrelink benefits, but services were definitely calling out. I remember seeing, because I notice on Facebook, I get posts because I'm always sharing all the reports put out by all the services that report on homelessness figures. And yeah, it was definitely being reported for some time, but it was kind of like, it was like the elephant in the room. No one ever wanted to talk about it. It never seemed to really get the attention of politicians when they were making decisions about things. It just wasn't discussed. And it's only in the last few years, and like probably since the last election, it's really started, like people are really starting to listen. And I think it's because the net of people that it's capturing has widened.
So I did want to ask you about that, particularly given that this sector is focusing especially on the implications for workers and essential workers. So are you saying, Saffron, that perhaps one of the changes over the decade is that more of the people that you're seeing now are actually, you know, working perhaps even full time?
Yeah, definitely.
Right. And in terms of access to support as a housing assistance worker, have you found it more difficult to connect people to support over time?
Absolutely. So now when we're making referrals to homelessness services, they're stretched. They've got long waiting lists. We've got one organisation who's funded to assist single adults in our area, and they've got a 8 to 10 week waiting list. Now, when someone's been served an eviction notice, they're already out and on the street by the time they're getting that first phone call. So that takes away any of the early intervention and prevention measures that anyone could possibly hope for. Luckily, I've worked in that industry in the past, so as a tenant advocate, I sometimes then am able to coach people through what to do when they're needing to access emergency accommodation. But that's kind of out of the scope of my role, and really it should be those homelessness services that are doing that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Lou, if I can just bring you in, our next session actually is talking about the experience of older people, but you've painted so alarmingly the situation facing, you know, someone reaching the end of your professional life, but performing such an incredibly essential service and yet unable to access, you know, safe or affordable or stable housing. Can you paint a picture for us of what a safe, stable housing situation would look like for you in your circumstances and what it would mean for your life?
Well, first it would need to be affordable, which is just a joke at the moment. I would like to have something, I guess my dream would be to have a place, and I'm not asking for a mansion, I'm just looking for a small little place that I could live in and anticipate staying in for the next 20 odd years, you know, and that would adjust when I do, or would allow me to retire at some stage. At the moment, that's not even on the horizon. I don't have that as an option. So to have something that I could secure for the next 20 odd years of my life, turning to 68 this year, anticipating that I might live till maybe 90, you know, as long as I keep fairly well, to have somewhere that I could be in that time, somewhere that was not isolating. I've had too much isolation in my life. Somewhere where I could be able to access my friendship group, family, health services, the things that I might need as I get older. At the moment, as I keep saying, it's not even on my horizon. I don't know that I have a future. I really don't. I think if something happened to me, my life would have to end, quite frankly. There is no future.
Oh, it's absolutely appalling to have you
But that's the reality.
face that, Lou. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but I'm very, very grateful that you're sharing that with us. Let me invite Saffron, Rita, and of course you, Lou, as well, if there's anything else that you would like to add right now. Knowing as well, of course, that we will accept submissions, you know, over the next months as we consider what we've heard and draft our report.
One of the issues for our members is that they will probably never be able to access home ownership because the rental markets are so high and people are struggling, and it must be so soul destroying to, you know, the vicarious trauma of reading people's stuff, but dealing with it day after day after day, as well as facing it yourself is just incredible. In a country as wealthy as Australia, you know, I've seen, since I came here in 1988, I've seen such a huge disparity. So we would like to see a range of housing options available for essential workers. But that range, if people are already living and beyond their means in rental accommodation, they're never going to save any money. They're drawing to, they're living from week to week and hand to mouth, and often telling us stories that they're feeding their children and not themselves. They, you know, the car breaks down. What do they go without to meet the needs? And these are often people with both partners working or one partner working. It's almost like not working for anybody. And it really is having, as my generation retires from the workforce, and we could access secure accommodation in the past, but as we retire from that workforce, they really are, there's a precipice coming where they won't be able to recruit experienced nurses and midwives and care workers to fill that gap, because they won't be able to live anywhere near where they are, and the gap in the wages and home ownership or secure rental has become too big to match.
One thing I've noticed, there's a lot of focus on affordable housing in city areas. It would be really great if it could kind of be in every area, honestly. You know, it's not only frontline workers, it's your waitresses, it's your cleaners, it's everyone who's pretty much on a normal wage, let's face it. Yeah, childcare, yeah, absolutely. They're all essential. But they're, you know, it's really hard when rent is so high and you can't live in the area that you're working in. So I think if there was some way to put affordable housing everywhere and not just focus on the inner city areas. Another thought I've had, and look, I don't really understand taxation and negative gearing, but clearly it's not working. But I've often wondered, why do we give all landlords incentives, regardless of whether they're owning an Airbnb or a property where they're just raising the rent and being really crappy landlords at the end of the day? Could there be instead a focus of shifting that so that landlords who are doing the right thing get those incentives. So, you know, if they're able to offer long-term leases, if they're going to offer reasonable rent and cap it and not continue to rise it unnecessarily, maintaining the property, keeping it in good repair, adequate heating. I live in a really cold area and there are a lot of people who don't have adequate heating. So just, yeah, I guess just shifting the focus. So rather than just rewarding every landlord out there just for having a property, how about rewarding the ones that do the right thing? And then that might give an incentive to other landlords to potentially do that.
Thank you, Saffron. And Rita and Lou, for your comments. We're going to have to draw it to a close. I'm going to just say a couple of things about what I've heard and what has struck me particularly, beginning, Lou, with your incredibly moving testimony for us, your experiences, despite the many, many years of professional service that you've offered. You've had such awful experiences, couch surfing. You've shown for us the implications of the lack of a housing safety net, and you've expressed that sense that I hope you know, ends for you very soon, which is this sense of hopelessness. And I really hope that that starts to change in part with the solutions that you've described being able to be put forward. We heard from Rita from the Nurses and Midwives Association, who took, I suppose, the personal experiences that Lou described and systematised us and gave us evidence about how widely experienced they are and the consequences of that, not only for the essential workforce that, you know, the health system depends, the nurses, but by extension, the wider essential workforce as well. And then we heard so movingly from Saffron, a housing assistance worker herself, the way that this issue has been a looming crisis. There's no excuse for a lack of action over the decades, but that the tenor of this has changed markedly over the past few years. I could go on, but let me end with some of the solutions that the three of you have put on the table. First and foremost, the picture that Lou gave us that shouldn't be an impossible dream of a secure, affordable home near social networks that allows people to live with agency and dignity into secure retirement. Saffron reminding us of the very real need to make sure that all of our solutions are regionalised, and we look at the rural and regional housing needs as well. And, you know, it's a very, very important point that instead of rewarding and incentivising all landlords, we need real rental reform that actually targets incentives towards a private rental sector that's delivering a secure and affordable and quality rental product. But at the end of the day, as I think the three of you have underscored, the importance of moving back to much wider access to appropriate and good quality social housing that's regarded as, you know, an important government investment in individual security, but also to underpin our economy and the essential services that the three of you have dedicated so much of your working life to providing. So with that, thank you so much.